Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Sparks from the ACDI, and I'd like to introduce you to and to welcome Helen Davies. She is a Chief Director of the Green Economy at the Western Cape Government, and that falls under the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. She's a UCT graduate, and she's worked for both the Western Cape Government as well as the City of Cape Town over the years. So she comes with a wealth of relevant experience. And today she's going to be presenting to us on the, as you can see on your screen, the Western Cape Municipal Energy Resilience Initiative. And we would welcome any questions that you might have, but we'd appreciate it if you put those in the chat box, and then we'll ask Helen to answer some of those at the end, depending on how much time we have. Just in terms of some logistics, if you could just keep yourselves on mute while she's presenting, and then we can unmute you when you have your questions. So I'm going to hand over to Helen and ask her to take us through her really interesting presentation. So thank you very much, Helen.
Great, thanks very much for the welcome, Debbie, and welcome to everyone. I always find webinars a little bit strange because I can't see anyone. I can't see body language. I can't even see if people are actually still there or if they've joined a call and walked away. So hoping you're all there, hoping this is interesting. Happy to answer any questions at the end. So maybe just to jump into things is I'm just going to give you an overview of the context for why we set up the Municipal Energy Resilience Initiative in the Western Cape Government, the kind of background and the key pressing points that led us to set up this program of work, and then take you through how we're responding to some of those challenges, how we've structured the MER, as we call it, initiative, and where we are to date in terms of progress and how we're dealing with things. So in terms of key issues and background, obviously number one is energy security. So we all know that as a country, we are in quite a serious state in terms of energy security and reliability. The data here for 2021 is as of June, and already we're pretty close to the load shedding events or the quantity of load shedding that occurred in 2020, which was our most intensive load shedding year to date. And what the estimates are that that has resulted in a reduction in real GDP growth by 2.3% in 2021 and 275,000 job losses. Those are figures from PwC. So the impact of load shedding is severe, not just on current economic functioning, but also in terms of building confidence for future economic growth. So it leads on to my second slide, which key issue is around economic distress. So we have economic distress for a number of reasons, but the high levels of unemployment we're sitting at 22.3% as a country at the moment. The economy is not growing fast enough to not growing fast enough to sufficiently absorb labor. The projected national growth rates by National Treasury are only 2.2 and 1.6% for 2022 and 23 respectively. So there were a lot of economic challenges before COVID, the COVID pandemic, but COVID has certainly exacerbated those challenges quite radically. Business confidence in the Western Cape, although it's improved in Q2 of this year, it still remains an ongoing challenge. And what that means is key to our economic growth is around attracting businesses, attracting investment to the province and to the country, but we can't do that while business confidence is low. We'd struggle. The other big issue, which you will all be very well aware of, are the issues around climate change. So we all know that the latest IPCC 6th assessment report has just come out, which just reminds us of the degree to which greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 need to be reduced. The fear at the moment is that the talk is very much, well, it's too late. But anyone involved in the climate change arena knows that we cannot afford as a planet to give up. So we've got to absolutely focus on what do we do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as fast as possible and as significantly as possible. On the right-hand side, I've just highlighted there from the World Economic Forum's latest global risks report, the top risks by likelihood and impact. And as you can see, climate-related events, climate action failure, etc., still rate very highly among both likelihood and impact. What we're also seeing is that the post-COVID-19 economic recovery plans that are being implemented by many of the Western Cape's export markets reflect an accelerated energy transition to lower carbon economies. And that then in turn becomes a threat to our own exports unless we reduce the carbon footprints of what's produced here for the export market. So in terms of response, I haven't covered all our responses, but just to touch on a few key aspects. First of all, the Western Cape, we have a COVID-19 recovery plan. A core part of this is the economic recovery and growth. It's basically how do we get jobs recreated, how do we attract investment, and how do we enable more people to be able to be employed. The key areas that are the focus of the economic recovery plan include accelerating the ease of doing business. So where government needs to make it easier for business to operate, to invest, etc., but also where does government need to simply step back and cut red tape. Boosting investment and exports. So they're critical around looking at where we're boosting exports from an energy point of view is making sure that we're aware of any potential green deals in their post-COVID recovery plans. The third is scaling up work opportunities and skills for people without jobs. The fourth is around boosting infrastructure, and the fifth is around economic resilience. And under economic resilience, the two key elements there are around enabling energy and water resilience. So I'm speaking particularly today to the component of energy resilience, but this is just to give you the context as to where energy resilience fits within this broader plan of economic recovery. In terms of a context of some of the energy changes happening in the country, which have also helped to frame the program of work that we're involved in, is, as many of you will know, the President's SONA address of 2020 and 2021 indicated that for the country's integrated resource plan of 2019 to be effected, it requires implementation of additional capacity from multiple sources. So it talks increasingly to a decentralized approach to energy provision in the country. Those addresses also spoke to no limit to industrial and commercial applications to produce electricity for own use, but only one license has been announced since those statements. There was also an opening of the door to enable municipalities in good financial standing to procure their own power from independent power producers. So there were regulations on new generation capacity that were gazetted in October 2020 around allowing municipal generation. We still need clarity though, and these still need to be tested with applications. So the door's been opened, but the processes, the how this would take place, there's still a lot of clarity needed. In terms of enabling embedded generation, so essentially rooftop PV at this stage, is there have been amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act, the ERA Schedule 2. They were released last Thursday, or the amended regulations were released last Thursday. And that allows for an increase in cap from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts for systems that are exempt from licensing requirements. So they certainly open up the door for wheeling, which is the trading of energy across a grid, and private procurement, but the regs are still unclear on municipal procurement. And that's one area we are focusing on trying to look at. Registration and other approvals for systems are still needed, but the systems and the processes for those approvals are in the process of being streamlined by the likes of NERSA. That's the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. Further, in terms of context setting, is Eskom unbundling. So this is unbundling into generation, transmission and distribution facilities. Some of that is delayed, and that could potentially cause problems in terms of a more decentralized and more competitive form of energy in the country. Then many of you will be aware of the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Program, which was aimed at meeting some of the short-term supply gaps. The financial close for those projects has been extended to September 2021. there's still questions on a number of those projects. I mean, one of which is the challenges to the power ships, which has there have been concerns raised and issues being addressed around environmental impact assessments and long-term power purchase agreements. And then lastly, the renewable energy independent power producer programs. So these are essentially the large utility scale power projects that national government procures to come onto the grid. So there we're looking at quite significant wind and solar PV systems to come onto the grid. The tender closed on the 16th of August, so that still has to go through the process of evaluation and awarding. And those projects are set to generate in 2023 or 24. So given all of that, our energy resilience objectives, essentially our target is 500 megawatts or more from lower carbon energy sources within the Western Cape by 2025. So this is with the baseline of 2020, with a value of investment in energy of 5 billion from 2025. And I just need to stress here that the implementation of those projects and the investment is not planned to be by public sector alone. So it's also increasingly, well, very importantly, looking at where do we leverage or enable private sector investment, whether that be for private sector use or public sector. Critical elements, a critical element is the issue around low carbon. So the country, we have Paris Agreement commitments, increasing pressure around carbon border adjustments for our exports, and we also really want to stimulate local manufacturing. So those are all components that kind of contribute to how we structure, how we address energy resilience in the province. The Western Cape's been working and driving energy resilience work for some time now. So for a number of years, we had an energy security game changer. We've been running work on the green economy for a number of years across a number of different departments within the Western Cape government. The Climate Change Directorate within the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning has for a number of years been doing work around climate change mitigation, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. We've also been, specifically in terms of energy supply, been supporting all municipalities in the province to develop and revise their small-scale embedded generation feed-in tariff frameworks and tariffs. So that's essentially to enable private sector or households to install solar PV, so rooftop PV, and feed any excess energy back into the grid, which they then get compensated for. At the moment, we have frameworks for 24 of the local municipalities in the Western Cape. That's out of the 25 local municipalities, and the city, and tariffs for 20 of those. We also facilitate engagements with businesses to drive the take-up of solar PV, and we support municipalities to enable wheeling. We support the energy sector businesses, so in terms of understanding regulations, understanding accessing to finance, etc. And we provide energy, technology, and cost options to businesses and municipalities. And lastly, supporting green economy investors in the Western Cape, and I'll speak to that further just now. A lot of the support is provided directly through the Western Cape government and also through our partner agency, Green Cape, as well as through partner organizations such as Wesgrow. When we structure the program, we're importantly looking at the key elements that I've spoken about. So it is about energy security and access, but critically it's about environmental sustainability and the potential to enable economic development and growth. So on the MER initiative itself, we're essentially looking to improve the energy resilience of the Western Cape province. And this is very much focused on enhancing business competitiveness, confidence, investment, growth, jobs preservation, and job creation, and to maintain and grow export opportunities. Why are we doing this? We're doing it in a way that addresses all dimensions of energy resilience. So it's critically, energy has to be affordable, secure, it's got to enable economic growth and provide for further economic growth, and needs to be environmentally sustainable. Municipalities, the aim is for them to buffer residents and businesses from the impacts of load shedding, but we need to stress that they will still be connected to the grid, the national grid, for the foreseeable future. So there have been a lot of media articles that have taken a slightly different spin on this and spoken about grid independence, being independent of Eskom, etc. we recognize very much that we certainly need the national grid for a long time to come. So this is very much about working with rather than trying to create some kind of independent option. We're reducing the risks and building the opportunities for exports. So critically there is around both growing new opportunities through local production, but also making sure that what is produced in the Western Cape has a lower carbon footprint, so that we don't become excluded from some of our key export markets. Our approach in the project is really around providing project development support and capacity building to help implement these projects. And importantly, it's not just for municipalities to generate and or procure renewable energy, but it's also to enable businesses and households to do the same. And lastly, just to stress on this slide that it's a programmatic approach to implementation. So it's not one or two small pilot projects, but it's moving towards a full programmatic approach. Excuse me. So importantly, it's around focusing on a decentralized system, low carbon energy generation and distribution to mitigate the risk of load shedding in South Africa. So you'll see in a lot of our narrative, we're trying to clarify the low carbon narrative of what it is we're doing, or the low carbon intention. But a lot of the narrative speaks to the kind of economic argument, and that's just a case of where we're at in terms of the province and some of the key priorities that we need to press forward. But we also recognize that bringing in the low carbon narrative more clearly will enable us down the line to look at the likes of climate change finance and various other elements. Need to stress that this isn't just a project being run by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, but also includes our Department of Local Government, our Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, and Provincial Treasury, and then critically all Western Cape municipalities. So while we focus on what we call candidate municipalities in the beginning of the program, which I'll explain more now, the idea is very much to look at all municipalities down the line. And then lastly, to stress on this slide, is the idea is very much to work closely with national government and other stakeholders. And it's really around exploring these new energy regulations and how those could lead to new projects within municipal areas. So we recognize that it's about finding different mechanisms, different systems, and saying that the private sector and spheres of government, such as municipal and provincial government, want to be part of the solution, the renewable energy solution, but we certainly need to work together. So this is a bit of a full slide, and I'll come back to this in a few slides as well, just to reorientate us. But just to highlight, we're essentially focusing the program on 3 phases. We're running it in 3 phases. The first, which I'll take in more detail just now, is around business cases. And that's business cases for different scales of renewable energy and battery storage. We also, if you look at the purple block, is based off the pronouncements made late last year and in the October 2020 regs. It's focused on allowing municipalities in good financial standing. So part of what we've done is a municipal readiness evaluation, which I'll run you through briefly just now. And that really is to assess which municipalities are ready and would be able to land renewable energy projects earlier than others. We've then undertaken a request for information out in the market and with municipalities to understand renewable energy projects that are already under development. And the idea here is really to look at where we have fairly mature, well-developed renewable energy projects that we could fairly quickly, through using different mechanisms, try to help bring online. So rather than starting everything from scratch. Part of that then leads into a roadmap of pioneering projects in what we call the candidate municipalities. We're also testing pooled mechanisms, so where it might be a number of municipalities or a province buying power. Excuse me. And we're also trying to unlock private sector wheeling. In phase 2 and phase 3, we're essentially working on ensuring that municipalities are provided with the right support so that they have the right systems in place. So an example is we're setting up a municipal energy resilience fund, which will provide funding to applicable qualifying municipalities to undertake or update their electricity master plans and cost of supply studies. So that will help them to assess what grid capacity they have available where, And we will then work with both those and the projects in the market to make sure that we try align projects and grid availability where possible, or we're aware of where grids might need to be upgraded. Importantly, municipalities only manage certain components of the grid, their own distribution area. So we will also work with Eskom in terms of transmission and distribution areas to make sure that where power is generated, we can actually bring it onto the grid for use by others where possible. And then down the line, we're also looking at the implementation of MER projects for all municipalities. Cross-cutting all is green economy ecosystem support, which I'll speak to a bit further just now, but that's essentially around enabling further small-scale embedded generation, enabling investment support. And then we have a number of cross-cutting themes, which I'll touch on in 2 slides a bit later. So first, just to cover in terms of the business case development. And a lot of this work is and what I'm presenting here is to also give you a sense of the scale of work and a kind of the structured strategic approach we've taken to identify all the relevant elements that actually need to be addressed before you can start landing projects in a very different way. So we've looked at large-scale battery storage, SSEG systems, embedded generation systems, or distributed generation systems, and utility scale. And then for each of those 4 components, we've looked at identifying what would be the best technology options for the province, what would be the optimal scales, any risks and mitigation against those risks, optimal location considerations. We've also looked to assess grid requirements and readiness. So to ensure that we've got the capacity to wheel power across whether it be a national or municipal grid. We're looking at commercial structuring requirements, appropriate transaction, financing and procurement mechanisms, required regulatory changes and process clarity, and key stakeholders. So we certainly don't have the definitive answers for everything, but we're trying to get a sense of at what scale do costs for certain projects start dropping off, which technologies are fairly scale agnostic, which technologies make more sense to be implemented on a modular basis versus in a centralized basis, and many other aspects. Some of the key findings around the business case it's still very much that solar PV and wind, both with and without storage, are likely to be the most competitive in terms of comparisons with Eskom price. Affordability is likely to be a challenge, but a lot of the costs we're seeing, particularly when you start looking at larger scale projects, come out as highly cost competitive. But a key aspect is around the licensing process and the registration processes. So there we're busy trying to get clarity around how cost of supply studies are considered with regards to renewable energy. A concern, and it's always been a concern for municipalities around small-scale embedded generation, is the potential loss of revenue. Distributed generation might also lead to loss of revenue, and we'll speak to that a bit further just now. But a lot of the work that's been underway to date has been to work with municipalities to set a feed-in tariff, assess the extent to which that tariff works, both to incentivize new rooftop PV, but also in a way that doesn't undermine the financial sustainability of a municipality. Importantly, we're trying to look at mechanisms that would allow municipalities to further incentivize rooftop PV or SSEG. On large-scale battery storage, battery costs, they're certainly decreasing quite radically, but they are still high. And there we need to look at, if we're trying to land projects in a shorter time frame, so a 12 to 24-month period, at least the initial projects, those might need to be without battery co-location, just in terms of the cost competitiveness. But over time, we increasingly bring batteries in. But we are certainly looking at the issue of battery storage, because that also helps us to address the variable load aspect of renewable energy. In terms of looking at municipal readiness, this is just to give you a sense also of, there's often a call, by ourselves as well as our other provinces' counterparts, to allow municipalities to procure renewable energy. But there is a lot of work that's required to look at which municipalities might be able to do that in the short, medium, and long term. So in this readiness assessment, we've looked at the financial standing and credit rating of municipalities. We've looked at their operational capacity, not just from a technical side, but also from their management and financial side of things, because they have to sign long-term take-off agreements, off-take agreements. So you need to make sure that they need to understand what they're signing off on and how that might impact on municipal financing. We've also looked at the energy policy and bylaw landscape. We've looked at energy-related projects taking place within those municipalities. So is the idea of renewable energy still very much part and parcel of their approach to moving forward? We've also importantly looked at a phase gate around electricity sales and electricity demand. And this is just for the first phase, particularly because we need to have municipalities that have enough of a demand to be able to act as an off-taker potentially for a project that's big enough. But down the line, we'll certainly be looking at other municipalities, and that's where we might start looking at pooled mechanisms. So the outcome is we obviously have the City of Cape Town, the metropolitan municipality that has its own pioneering renewable energy projects. We've, through this process, identified 6 candidate municipalities. So at the moment, those are Drakensberg, Mossel Bay, Overstrand, Saldanha Bay, Stellenbosch, and Swartland. And we have 10 we call follower municipalities and 8 municipalities that require further development and support and who we will work closely with. Moving into phase 3, I just want to focus questions on the right-hand side. And these are the kind of things we need to look at to have a scaled program at a provincial level. So it's around what are the opportunities to scale and what are the requirements? Can standardization reduce transaction costs and increase efficiencies? And that's standardization also around power purchase agreements, around terms of reference that go out, etc. Are there any common infrastructure elements that we can address collectively? Cross-cutting issues that might be in place, opportunities for common procurement, and then at what level? What resources are lacking, and how do we look at different ways of deploying resources so we can enable more projects to come on stream? What opportunities are there for district-led procurement and support, and for provincial-led procurement and support? Just to reorientate you, bringing you back to this overall diagram of our approach and moving into the bottom cross-cutting blocks here. In terms of green economy ecosystem support, so a lot of the support that's offered is through the energy sector desks that we currently run through Green Cape and fund through Green Cape. But we also help support, and we're part of the Atlantis Special Economic Zone. So this is a green tech SEZ. Excuse me. The energy equipment manufacturing is a key component. And there are some of the key opportunities that are already there and are being further explored are around wind and solar components, particularly into the utility scale renewable energy supply chain. Also trying to push and take advantage of the localization requirements that DTIC has put in place and the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan IPP Office intent for localization. Essentially, the Atlantis SEZ is also about building new manufacturing skills. It's creating what's called a living lab concept, where they're experimenting with new technologies and incubating those on the site. And it's being developed to be gas ready. So if we do import more gas, it's looking at how that could be used on the site. Overall, they're looking at by 2034, 2,700 jobs created and 3.2 billion rand of investment. In terms of the other cross-cutting areas of work, so we're setting up a MER panel of service providers, and that's essentially for us to procure services around multiple different types of renewable energy projects, whether those be transaction advisory services and other. We're also looking, I mentioned the Western Cape MER Fund, and that's for municipalities to fund foundational energy studies. A next critical area of cross-cutting work is around national regulatory lobbying and clarity. So there are a lot of changes that are required in the regulatory and legislative space in the country. And here we're not trying to beat a stick. We're very much trying to look at what changes are required, how can we help those changes to move forward, what can we put in place, what can we test in the Western Cape, but ultimately for use by others in the country as well. The Western Cape Integrated Resource Plan we're looking to develop. So we're just scoping that out at the moment, but essentially that's around identifying the preferred future pathways in the electricity sector. And that enables us to meet the forecast demand, but aligning to the provincial strategy, and importantly, enables a fact-based approach for our energy master planning, but also for our procurement of projects moving forward. In terms of our cross-cutting areas of work, further, municipal revenue it's a huge concern at the moment. So municipalities have been concerned enough about rooftop PV, and these are fairly small-scale systems that then potentially reduce revenue, or they do reduce revenue to a municipality. And as we allow for more off-grid or partially off-grid systems to come online, for example, further systems, 10 megawatts plus, etc., particularly where it's private to private use, that could start impacting or will start impacting municipal revenue. So a lot of the work we're doing here is looking at how do we ensure that municipalities are part of a new system, that they use their grids as a means of enabling the trading of power, and that's done in a way that enables a municipality to maintain its financial sustainability. The next key area is around stakeholder management and coordination, and this is critical because the province needs to work with all municipalities, but also with all key national stakeholders and our other provinces. We're really trying to look at how do we work with everyone to test a new system and to see how that system could work here, but then could work elsewhere as well. And then our communications approach is very much on trying to make sure people are aware of what it is we're doing, also what it is we're not doing, and to enable communication back to us in terms of where the market does need government to intervene versus where the market needs government to step back. But all of this is aimed at really trying to build confidence and trying to make sure that we build an economy that works. So the last slide I have here is just a summary slide. Just to clarify that we're aiming to enable the implementation of renewable energy projects at scale in a decentralized manner and as soon as possible. But they have to be financially sound. Otherwise, municipal revenue and long-term functioning or service delivery will be at stake. The critical component is low carbon. So it really is around both the climate change commitments, but it's also around exports and protecting exports, particularly as exports are set to be a cornerstone of our economic growth plans. And to stress lastly that the MER initiative is not a quick fix. So when we first set this up, we realized that the expectation was that there would be massive projects developed and constructed within 6 to 12 months. We've kind of had to tone down some of those expectations because we certainly want to implement projects as quickly as possible. But we're also testing and the structuring and implementation of new systems of energy generation. And we're doing this within an environment that is changing very fast and very significantly. So that's all I have for you today, and happy to take any questions. Thanks very much, Debbie.
Thanks so much, Helen. That was really helpful, just to, especially since we live in the Western Cape, to have a good perspective of what's coming ahead of us. I would like to now open this to anyone who has questions. You can type your question in the chat box, or you could also just raise your hand, and then we can take the questions from there. Okay, so Anna Taylor says, thanks, Helen, exciting stuff. I saw Green Cape mentioned on your slide. What role is EDP and SEA playing in this initiative?
Okay, do you want me to do, should I just answer them as they come up, Debbie?
Yes, yeah, if you just want, I've just read that one out to you. If you want to just answer that one, and then I'll take others as they come.
That's fine. I can't see the chat box. I just want to check. You said what role is SEA and EDP playing?
And EDP playing in this initiative.
Yeah, so Green Cape are currently contracted by us to run what we call our green economy ecosystem support. So some of the work that's done is through that contract, and some of that work is through other support functions. The EDP, we work closely with the EDP, that's the Economic Development Partnership. And yeah, we work more closely with them on the water side at the moment. On the energy side, it's very much around them just helping to open doors with key stakeholders, stakeholder groupings, where those are required. SEA, I assume you mean Sustainable Energy Africa, Hannah?
Yeah, I do.
Thanks. How's it? Yeah,
Hi.
SEA is still that we're not working with them at the moment. They are working very closely with the city on a number of the city's strategic work, and we work closely with the city as well. So we also work with the city in terms of what they're doing, understanding where their focus areas are, and trying to not reinvent the wheel between province and city as well, but very much build on what they're doing, and the work that we've been doing around business cases, etc. we share with the city as well.
Great, thanks for that. Are there any other questions from anybody else, or comments, or clarifications? Okay. Kalia says, thanks for the presentation. From the 2,700 jobs that are estimated to be created, do you know how many of those are low skilled?
So Kalia, sorry, I don't know the exact breakdown, but it's certainly a mix. And what's important is part of the whole Atlantis SEZ approach is not just the provision of jobs, but it's also comes with a whole skilling program. So there are a number of organizations that work in that area that are providing skills development opportunities, particularly to people who live in the Atlantis area, and then also more broadly beyond that. And those skills development opportunities are for a variety of jobs. It's not just for the renewable energy sector, so it's broader. But certainly there's a key component focused on renewable energy, with the idea for companies that do set up in that area to utilize the people who've been trained up through the Atlantis SEZ where possible.
Great, thanks, Helen. There's a question from Daryl Hunt, who'd like to know why there was no mention of distribution systems.
Sorry, Daryl, can you possibly just clarify your question more?
Yes, morning or afternoon. The emphasis seems to be on generation opportunities, but we're seeing at a national level that our biggest challenge is going to be in the wires. And one would have thought at a municipal level, one would have some mention of distribution wires and distribution substations as part of a resilience program.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. Sorry, I just didn't speak to it too much, is where we looking at the work with the municipalities around foundational energy studies. A chunk of that work is to understand what capacity they have where, and that's around looking at them, their role in terms of a wires business. So it is trying to look at what capacity they have where, and then also map that with what the private sector projects are out there, and how do we look at the two together. Importantly, we're engaging with the likes of Infrastructure South Africa and others around, if we identify key areas where there's good potential for renewable energy projects, but there's no capacity, whether that be on the networks themselves or in the substations, etc., the connection points, then we'd look to how do we then move that into an infrastructure upgrade and development program. So our work is very much around identifying where those needs are, and then reaching out to partners to look at different ways of how those could be funded down the line. But it is a critical part of the work. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. And a question from Brian Palmer. He says, is there effort being made to shift municipal financing schemes away from being reliant on consumer electricity bills, in addition to the obvious need to protect municipal finances via those revenue streams?
Thanks for the question, Brian. So yes, I mean, essentially what we need to look at is the whole municipal revenue model. And this is something which everyone's recognized for a long time and everyone's been working on for a long time, but we don't really have the solutions yet. But we've been engaging a lot with the City Support Program based in National Treasury, who are working on this in a very, they've got a huge program focused on this at the moment. So particularly in the light of the expansion of the renewable energy space now. Because what you don't want to have happen, which is what traditionally happened when SSEG was kind of first coming to the fore, is municipalities effectively not blocking, but not allowing tariffs that incentivized SSEG in any way, because they simply saw it as a threat, rather than seeing it as an opportunity to enable broader economic growth and a different form of municipal revenue through rates, etc. So yes, municipal revenue streams and the whole model needs a radical rework. Everyone's aware of that, and we're looking from our side to do some work just in terms of, for Western Cape municipalities, how do we manage this going forward? Thanks.
Great, thanks for that. Zakeli Skosana wants to know, to ask, how did the province decide on the 500 megawatt target? And secondly, how far off are we from the target?
Thanks, Zakeli. So the target, we looked at a number of aspects. It's not a perfect science. I mean, anyone in government will tell you that for a lot of targets that we set. So it was a mixture of looking at the rate of SSEG implementation to date and where that might take off. It also looks at renewable energy, the REAP projects, the utility scale projects, and what's set to be implemented in the Western Cape. Down the line, it will include things like the risk mitigation IPP projects based in the Western Cape. And it'll look at our own, the municipal projects that are brought online, as well as private sector projects. So to be clear, the target isn't just what the Western Cape government will help implement, but it's around what is implemented in the Western Cape. So given that, if regulatory changes occur the way we need them to occur, that target of 500 could be exceeded. If we still have some of the kind of holdbacks in regulatory changes, and if we get more and more pushback from municipalities in terms of the threat to revenue, because we don't find that or develop that alternative revenue model, then that target could be under threat. At the moment, we don't know how far we're off from the target. We're busy collecting a lot of the data at the moment. We also importantly trying to understand with municipalities. In the past, we've always collected data on registered systems, but we are very aware of the growing number of unregistered systems. So part of what we're looking at in terms of collecting data is trying to get a sense of the unregistered systems as well, and then to understand why those systems are unregistered. So is it because the processes in place are incredibly onerous, or what might be the reasons, and how do we support municipalities to enable more systems to be registered? Thanks.
Great. And a question from Kevin Foster. What is the thinking about resilience for the 8, with a question mark, non-qualifying municipalities while work is being done to bring them up to financial soundness? In other words, buffering supply or growing their economies.
Thanks. So the Municipal Energy Resilience Fund that we're putting in place is going to be open to all municipalities. It was originally being set up only for candidates, but it's actually being set up for all municipalities. Where we have municipalities that fail one of the initial criteria, which is around an unqualified audit, that's where we'll use our panel of service providers down the line and as budget allows. And that's where there might be certain cases where a municipality has some challenges around financial soundness, and we'll then look as to how do we procure those services that are required and allocate them to a municipality. But in terms of the actual long-term PPAs and offtake agreements, a lot of that's also going to come down to the different kind of financial mechanisms that are developed and the extent to which we can pool projects, increase the kind of scale of projects and get better financing and de-risking of those projects. So I think once we start moving in that way, then we can start bringing on the municipalities that are struggling a bit, because it's often the municipalities that are doing well get helped, and the municipalities that aren't doing well we kind of hold back from them. So we very much, the intention is to try reach this out to all municipalities as we move forward. But our initial focus does need to be on showing that this can work, proof of concept, A, so that we can keep our own funding going to enable those projects to happen, but B, so we can also attract external financing in. Thanks.
Great. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask? You're also welcome to raise your hand if you would rather not use the chat box. Just seeing if there are any new messages. Okay, there's another one from Boipelo Modise. Says, Helen mentioned in her presentation that the use of batteries as a source is in decline. Does this mean that in the future, the municipality may not consider the use of them, or there will still be where there's a shortage? Do the batteries include generators/engines, and will the procurement be only from local suppliers? This applies to also solar, PV, wind.
Okay, I'm not sure if I misspoke in the presentation. It's not the use of batteries as a source is in decline, it's the cost of batteries. So it's a positive that the cost of batteries is coming down, and as they come down, they'll make projects more cost competitive, and they'll certainly be implemented at greater scale. I think batteries are, I mean, we all know batteries are absolutely critical in terms of managing variability, but also in terms of kind of managing the amount of renewable energy that can be brought onto the grid. So the question, and that's part of what the teams are looking at, is whether it's better to have large utility scale banks of batteries versus co-location at source. And given the challenges that we have around grid capacity, co-location at source might be the best way to go, but might also be a more expensive option. So it's just that in the short term, in terms of getting some projects landed as quickly as possible, some of the battery costs are still prohibitive. But I think that's where we need to look and be more clever and say, how do we get alternative financing in to bring down the cost of batteries further in the interim until the market prices have come down. But no, batteries absolutely need to be part of the future. I'm not sure if I've answered all of that, so if you could just clarify, there's anything further need to be clarified. Thanks.
Grace, hello, maybe just type in the chat box if you need any further clarification. And there's a question from Collins. Would you know how much the Western Cape will be allocated for storage in the REI 4P?
Short answer, no. Yeah, so I really don't know, but the bid window 5 round has just been closed. So I think they'll take about 3 or 4 months before they issue results from that. Thanks.
Great. Are there any other questions? Just checking that there are no hands raised. Okay, we've got one from World Wildlife Fund, WWF South Africa. Louise Naudet says, hello, what is Western Cape's view on fossil gas as a peaking energy source? Some are pushing hard for this.
Yeah, hi Louise, and thanks. Yeah, at the moment, they're kind of conflicting perspectives on gas. And so our colleagues in environmental affairs, along with ourselves, are actually going through a number of conversations at the moment to try to develop a clearer position on gas. Gas is certainly, there's certainly roles for it, particularly in some of the industrial developments and others, but we also, in the past, gas was very much put forward as the transition fuel. But the takeoff of renewable energies has been a lot quicker than I think was expected back then. And we also have different options such as green hydrogen and others coming to the fore. So at the moment, we recognize that it's something that needs to be looked at, and we're actively looking at what is province's position so that we have a clearer line on it. And I'm afraid that's all I can say on that at the moment.
Okay, she's just followed that up with saying those some have a vested interest in promoting gas.
Yeah, I can't comment on that for now, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other comments or questions? Okay, I think if that's all the questions, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Helen for taking the time to prepare a presentation for us. I found it particularly interesting. And yeah, for sharing your time and your knowledge. It's great to find out more about what the Western Cape government is doing. So thank you very much. And we hope to be able to call you back in a few more years' time so you can tell us what has hopefully happened.
A pleasure, Debbie. Thanks to everyone for your time. And then just to make a request to anyone who's on the call is to get this right, we also need partners. We need partners to give us inputs in terms of where you think we're on the right track versus other things we need to consider, but also partners in terms of lobbying to key national partners and others. It's really, I mean, it's like the whole area of climate change work. We have to do this in collaboration. We have to do it together. So anyone who is able to help us engage with the likes of DMRE and others to really see what we're trying to put forward here, not as a threat to the current system, but as as kind of another bow in the arrow, I think they say. We really reach out and appeal to everyone to help where you can. Thanks so much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Helen.